out a manager or a player or something like that, but I never really thought that much about what they did off the field. And I'm not sure I thought that much about what they do on the field. I just got started doing this. I had, with Sabre, I had done a book on scouts back in 2011. And the guy that I partnered with, it was his idea. I just worked with him. He was an expert on scouts. So he introduced me to a lot of scouts, and I got an appreciation for the work that scouts do. And then a similar kind of thing happened. I thought, I was the one that came up with the idea for umpires, but it was mainly just to do a book on umpires in conjunction with another Sabre member that had some expertise in the area. And he loved the idea, and we just started doing it. The Red Sox have, the reason I was able to go to Fenway Park today is because I do have a press pass, and it's closed right now. I think I was the only non-employee that was in there for 15 minutes. I just went in to take a photograph. As Bob said, it was just kind of a quick visit, and I took a photograph of I had the scoreboard set up in a certain way for a future book project, nothing to do with umpires. But over the last several years, I think the first thing that happened was in 2002, we had our national convention. We get about 700 or 800 people that come to a Sabre convention. It was in downtown Boston. And I put together one of the panels. And for some reason that I couldn't possibly remember now, I had an official scorer on the panel. I had an umpire, a former Major League umpire on the panel, and an umpire supervisor. And that was my first contact actually talking to an umpire. It wasn't as scary as I thought it might be. It was kind of interesting, and I just got progressively more interested. One of them, Steve Palermo, he came from the Worcester area originally. He was a Major League umpire for many years, and he got shot and paralyzed, actually, in an incident in Texas at a restaurant. One of the waitresses was being hassled by a couple of guys outside, and he went out with one of the umpires to try to intervene, and there were a couple of guys, one of them had driven off in a car, and he came back and shot him. And so he was no longer able to work on the field, but Major League Baseball made him an observer, a supervisor. So he would come into games and score the umpires, grade them on how they were doing. And I got to know him in the press box that way. And fascinating guy, fascinating story. And we became friendly. And so I did an interview. I wrote up his story for Sabre, 5 or 6 page biography. And then I got to know more of these guys. So we put together a book called the Sabre Book on Umpires and Umpiring. And in the course of that, one of the things I did is I got together before games at Fenway Park. There's a room for the umpires. They have their own dressing room for the 4 of them that work each game. It's naturally separate from the teams. And they sit, they get there. Usually they don't get there much before a game, maybe an hour before a game. And they change, and then they maybe play cards for a bit or something like that. But I was able to impose on several groups of them, and they usually have a card table, and we sat at the card table, and I just asked for 20 minutes. I went around and asked them, how did you become an umpire? Why did you become an umpire? What do you think you would have done in life if you had gone some other route? And I began to develop a real appreciation for them and the work that they do and the obstacles that it takes to become a successful Major League umpire. It's one of the hardest things to do, to accomplish, is to get to that level. I think it's easier, you have to have the talent, but in some ways it's easier to become a Major League Baseball player than it is to become an umpire. I mean, first of all, each team has 25 of them, so at a normal game, there's 50 Major League umpires playing, and there's only, 50 Major League players, and there's only 4 umpires. So right there's a certain ratio. At umpire school, I went down for 3 days to see what it was like in 2017 to the Ormond Beach, Florida is where it is on the coast. Well, beach, that makes it coast. To see what it was like at umpire school, and they all tell the same story about going to umpire school. Class of maybe 150. One guy said he was in a class of 182. And they say, look around the room at all your other umpires here, hopeful umpires. Some of them were high school or college umpires trying to get better training or whatever. They said, one of you might have a chance to make it to the major leagues, and that's about it. And part of the reason is there's only 76 openings. And that's only recent. With replay, they added 4 more umpires. So before that, there were only 72. So it's a very small group. And it also takes a long time because they have pretty decent tenure. Once you're a major league umpire, unless you really mess up in some way, you can, or get injured, you can be an umpire for not 20 or 30 years. But it takes on an average 8 to 10 years to become an umpire if everything goes right for you. One of the guys that I often sit with at Fenway is Kevin O'Connor. He's from Oxford, Massachusetts, and he went to umpire school, finished well, got hired and started working his way up the way minor leaguers work their way up. Work a year or two at single A, work a year or two at double A baseball. He got up to triple A baseball, did some Pawtucket Red Sox games and other places around the country, of course, because they're on the move. But he, after 6 years, I think he looked at the ages of the umpires that were in the system, what he knew about them, just a general feeling. He had a feeling that it might take him another 4 or 5 years. And he couldn't hack it any longer. Basically, it is, he had a family that he was trying to support, and working as a AAA umpire for $15,000 a year was not really going to be adequate. Major league, I'm hopping around a lot here. Major league umpires will make a couple $100,000 a year, up to $400,000, $450,000 a year, if they finally make it to that level. So it's a very good job, and they do want to stay if they've got the job. But getting there is the hard thing. So he became a real estate agent and sells real estate in central Massachusetts, but he does work for Major League Baseball as an observer. And that's why I see him at games. He's up there, and they grade these umpires, even after they've made it. Every umpire after every game has access through the internet to a score sheet that the home plate umpire will be told what percentage of the calls he got correct for balls and strikes. They'll all get a rating of how they did in terms of any calls that they have to make on the bases. They'll even get rated for things like hustle and positioning. I mean, they might make the right call at first base, but maybe if they'd been 3 or 4 feet further off to one side, they would have had a better angle. And so maybe they were lucky that they made the call, but they are expectations on how they're going to perform, and they get graded on that. They all, by the time they get to major leagues, they're all getting 95, 96, scores like that. But I don't know how many people ever get 100. I never asked anybody that. That'd be a good question to ask. It's a rough life being an umpire, even once you've made it. They don't live in the towns that they work. The umpires that work the game in Fenway Park don't live in Boston and just take the tee over. They are from all over the country. No umpiring crew will stay at a given park for more than 4 days in a row. If there's a 4-game series or a 3-game series, that's it. And then they're off to the next city. If they happen to be from Boston, they get to see their families for 3 or 4 days. And then they're off to maybe New York, maybe Seattle, maybe Kansas City, wherever they have to go next. And then they might not see their families again for a month or 2. They do get a couple weeks vacation during the course of the actual season, so that's nice. They're able to come back, but they're living out of hotels, and they're on the move too. They might have a Sunday night game that gets over extra innings, could go for 14 innings. I mean, you never know how long a game's going to go. They're tending to go longer anyhow these days. But Sunday night game, go back to the hotel, they got to be up at 5 o'clock in the morning to get the first plane out to be able to get to the next city in case there's a Monday night game. Monday's often an off day, so sometimes they have a little more leeway that way. But Mondays and Thursdays are the typical travel days, but not every Monday and not every Thursday. It's really fortunate if an umpire might get, and this might happen once a year, that they work a Chicago Cubs game and then work a Chicago White Sox series. I mean, I should say series, not games. So they might work 6 or 7 days in Chicago, but it doesn't always work that way. There's so many considerations that go into scheduling it. That's actually rare. It would happen maybe once a year that a crew would stay in Chicago or stay in New York or stay in the Bay Area or Los Angeles. There's, several different places, 4 different places where you could stay in the same city. Most of the time they're up and on the move, and it's just the 4 of them, and not necessarily the same 4. They do have a crew. There's a crew chief, and they have a crew of 3 other people that work for that crew chief. But there are injuries, and then an umpire from AAA might get called up to fill in for somebody that's injured. There are the vacations that I mentioned. There are family emergencies that come up and things of that sort. So the same 4 group of people are together much of the year, but maybe as much as 40% of the time, they're not the same 4 people because one person or another is off on vacation. So it's a small group. The baseball teams, there's 25 players, coaches, other people that travel with the team. They could have a lot of friends. Umpires can only have 3 friends, and maybe not the same friends all the time. I'm being a little absurd, but when they're traveling, that's the size of the traveling party. They don't travel with the teams. They don't hop onto the team charter. They take commercial flights. They book their own hotels. They try to stay at a hotel that's different from where the teams might stay, just to be further away from any kind of interaction that they might get that might appear to be, might raise eyebrows or something of that sort if they were too close to the teams. They have a solitary life. One of the umpires that I became pretty friendly with is a guy named Ted Barrett. And he's a fascinating guy. I wrote his biography as well. He is, he says they call me Reverend Dr. Crew Chief Barrett. And I said, why do they call you that for? And the reason is he's a minister. He's an ordained minister. He has a doctorate of theology. Now, that's not something I think most people would expect an umpire to have. 2 of the 72 guys have doctorates. Another guy has a doctoral law degree. He's involved in real estate law, but he's got a doctorate. But Ted Barrett is a minister, and he wrote his thesis on essentially the problems that umpires face. Some of them have had substance abuse problems of one kind or another. It might be alcohol. It might even be what's called sex addiction of some kind. It's maybe one umpire, I didn't ask for names, but maybe one umpire has had one of these problems or another in the last 20 years or so that Ted's been doing it. But he got all these guys to talk about the loneliness on the road. And, what if you didn't like a couple of the umpires and you're on the same crew with them? You're there for the most of the season. They all do seem to respect each other, and I think they probably give each other distance. They don't necessarily travel in a pack of 4 from the hotel to the ballpark. Often they do. I suppose typically they do. But sometimes you'll see 2 umpires come in, and then another one will come in, and then the 4th one will come in 5 minutes later. They definitely do not always travel together, and they don't always stay at the same hotel. They do make their own arrangements. So 3 of them may be staying at a Marriott, and the 4th one might be staying at a Hyatt because he gets frequent visitor, points for staying at Hyatts. Some of them like Hyatt hotels better, they told me, because they tend to have they have swimming pools, for instance. And these guys, some of them put these days more of an emphasis on physical conditioning because it's a tough job physically. For 4 hours, you're going to be out there maybe running around to some extent, getting in position, and hopefully not getting dehydrated. You'll see Bat Boy come out with a water ball every so often if it's a hot game, or the umpires will beckon for one. But they do get beat up a little bit. There's a lot of concussion problems, especially for home plate umpires. Foul balls going off the mask. Occasionally, a bat will swing all the way around and hit an umpire on the back of the head. So some of them have masks that are like hockey masks that have a protector for the back of the head. They have some medical personnel that are devoted entirely to umpires that they can call on. The main doctor is in Phoenix, but he's on call, and he has a couple people on staff. They do have a mental skills or mental coach too that somebody can talk to if they're having a problem of one sort or another. One of them lost his wife. She died during the course of a season a couple of years ago. And I mean, he didn't come back for the rest of the season. He came back the next season. But I mean, things do happen that nobody anticipates. The one thing that impressed me, so that impressed me first of all, was just kind of what a solitary life it is, and how hard you have to work to get there. Low pay, conditions working progressively through the minor leagues are, when you start off young, and at single A baseball, the kind of hotels you're staying at are not the best hotels. There are incidents that have occurred with stick-ups. I mean, I don't know who would stick up an umpire because they didn't have any money to begin with, but things happen. That doesn't tend to happen if you're staying at a Hyatt hotel somewhere, but anything can happen anytime. The other thing I think that impressed me right away was how dedicated they are. And, there's got to be an exception. There's got to be, maybe there's 6 or 7 umpires that didn't want to talk to me. Maybe those were the slackers. I don't know. Probably not. They just I thought more of them would not want. I was surprised at how open most of them were. I thought 90% of them would decline to talk because there was no advantage to them to talk to me and answer questions. And I just expected more resistance or hesitancy or privacy. They don't like being in the public eye. The name of the book, as Bob mentioned, is Working a Perfect Game, and perfect game is in quotation marks. I asked, it was Tony Randazzo that said he likes to work a perfect game. And I said, well, every umpire would want to work a perfect game or a no-hitter. And he said, that's not what I mean. And I said, okay, what do you mean? And he said, a perfect game is when I go through the whole game, there's no controversy, no problem with either team, that I've made the right calls, my fellow umpires have made the right calls, we were in the right position to make the right calls, there's nothing up in the air, it's just, and it may be reasonably quick game too. But that's a perfect game where there's just no blowback. Nothing really went wrong. And they don't happen all that often. There's usually somebody gets upset about something, or somebody, messes up in some fashion. But they are fallible. They do make mistakes. And if they do, when they do, they beat themselves up about it. It's not, as I said, by the time they reach the major league level, it's not like they're going to lose their job because they blew a call and get overruled on replay. There was one umpire, what is it, last summer, one umpire made 3 calls. It was a game in San Diego. I was in London. I went over to see the Red Sox play the Yankees in London. And so I missed the Sabre convention, which was in San Diego, but the whole convention group got to see this one umpire get overruled 3 times for calls at first base. I mean, that's terrible. But he didn't get fired. He just went a black mark on his record. He probably didn't get promoted to the postseason that year, because that's one of the reasons that they rank them, is to see if you are going to be in postseason play when you got even more eyes watching you than just one game, but multiple, fewer games. There's more people watching each one. Talking to them about, plenty of umpires told me that they've lost sleep after a game, that they know they didn't do their best. And I think we can all appreciate that. I mean, whatever job we've had, or whatever, if you don't have a job, whatever task you might have set yourself, if you don't do well, you can feel badly about it. These guys are, what's the word, A level or type A personalities. I mean, they're putting themselves out there. They're on national television. They've got 35,000 people in a ballpark watching them, seeing if they're going to screw up, ready to yell things like "kill the umpire" or whatever. If they make a bad call, they don't really have a big fan club that comes to games to cheer for the umpires. So they beat themselves up when they make a bad call, when they know they made a call. Maybe they made the right call, as I said, but they were out of position, and but they still beat themselves up for that. I asked some of them if they get recognized off the field, and every one of them said hardly ever. I mean, Joe West is, if some of you know some of the umpires, he's the one umpire these days that gets recognized off the field. For just the way he looks, his personality and so forth, he does get recognized. Almost none of the rest of them would get recognized. Every once in a while, they say they might be sitting at a restaurant a couple hours after a game, maybe a day game, they went out for dinner or something of that sort, and maybe somebody will come up and recognize them. And I would usually joke with them. I said, well, that's because you left your face mask on. You know, you're supposed to take that off when you go to a restaurant. But anyhow, that's just it's very rare. One of them told a story about after a game, he was in an elevator and he just decided to egg on some of the fans. He said, boy, what a crummy game. He was in the team that the home team lost, and what a crummy game. Did you see that umpire at second base? What a jerk that guy was. And it got a couple of other guys in the umpire in the elevator agreeing with him that the umpire at second base was a real jerk. He said, boy, if I ever see that guy, I'll knock his block off. And, you know, somebody else, yeah. And, you know, it's just a joke. His other umpires were with him and they didn't say anything and they just went and left and probably joked about it later. Another one of them told me a story about he came into the ballpark with somebody else. They entered the park at the same time and he got in a conversation with this guy. And the guy said, she said, I'm in from Kansas City or something like that. Do you live here? And he said, no, I'm in from out of town too. This is the umpire saying, I'm in from out of town too. And the guy said, oh, well, what do you do? And he said, oh, I just travel around some. I try to catch games when I can. This is the umpire talking. And so they had a little conversation. He said, well, I hope you have a good seat to the fan that was coming in. So then, you know, like the second inning or so, all of a sudden he realized that was the fan in the second row. He recognized the guy, and the guy recognized him at just the same moment. And the fan pointed at him and said, you're the guy from the elevator. And he said, yeah, I guess I was. And so I joked to the umpire. He didn't come up with a line fast enough, and I probably wouldn't have on the spur of the moment. I said, you should have told that guy, I could see you got a good seat. Well, I've got an even better seat. Because he was working home plate right behind, you know, he could see everything from there. It just impressed me how serious they take their work. They will say some things like the integrity of the game and all that type of stuff, and that could just be PR talk, but they convinced me that they meant it. Most of them, I mean, you know, they have their jokes about things and the way of minimizing things and not coming across as too holy and so forth. But you could just sense sometimes, even if they're joking, that they really do care about their work and they want to do a good job. That's how they got to where they are. They want to do a good job, and it matters to them if they have not performed up to their own standards. I just looked at my watch. I didn't realize I was going to talk quite this much. There's bound to be all kinds of questions that you might have about things like instant replay these days, or I mean, I could go on for a long time, but you probably got some questions that if I don't see have you got the screen up?
Yep, so I do. We actually haven't received any questions yet in the chat. But
you could wave your hand if you've got a question and unmute your microphone and just speak it.
Yep. So if folks have any questions, like Bill said, you can raise your hand. I know some of you aren't sharing your screen. In that case, you can raise your hand, use the virtual
Yeah.
hand feature, or you can just type your question into the chat. But Bill, to kick things off, why don't you start talking about, what are umpires' feelings on the technology advances in the game, including instant replay?
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. I'd be interested if any of you has been an umpire. I never was. If any of you has been an umpire at any level, many of the people that go to umpire school, they don't make it to the major leagues, but they end up working high school, or they work college in the baseball season, and so they do end up doing some work of that nature. Technology, I think it's a kind of a mixed bag. I think the older umpires aren't as used to, I'm 75. I mean, the older umpires aren't as used to or comfortable with technology as some of the younger ones. I think the younger ones have grown up knowing that certain things are coming that the older umpires never had to even worry about or think about when they began. But most of them, I picked up 3 or 4 times, I picked up a sense of people being not that thrilled about it, but resigned to it. I don't think most of them really want to see balls and strikes automated. But in terms of making sure that a runner at first base is safe or out, or especially if a guy slides into home plate, was he safe or was he out? I think they really do care about that. And nobody likes to get overturned if you're the calling umpire and the crew in the replay center in New York determines that your call was incorrect. It's disappointing. If you get upheld, then of course you can feel better. But the most famous story in our recent lifetime, and maybe in the history of baseball, some of you will probably remember it. There's an umpire named Jim Joyce that umpired a game, and Andres Galarraga was pitching a perfect game, a truly perfect game. He had no base runner. He didn't walk anybody. There was no error behind him, and he certainly didn't give up a base hit for 8 2/3 innings. He was down to the final out. If he got that final out, it would have been a perfect game. And in fact, he did get the out, but the umpire, Jim Joyce, called him safe, called the base runner safe at first base. There was no instant replay then, so the umpire's call stood. And the guy got the next out, so therefore he got a shutout and won the game. But there's only been, I think, 23 perfect games in the history of baseball, and this guy would have been in that very, very select group. He's a young guy, Venezuela, and it was, you don't even hardly dream of that. I imagine, I'm never having been a major league pitcher, but I don't think it's a thing you even dare dream about. Yeah, maybe I'll pitch a no-hitter, but a perfect game, I mean, it's just, it would have also met massive attention of, probably would have had statues put up to him in Caracas or whatever. But he lost the perfect game because of a faulty call that the umpire made. Jim Joyce, the minute he got back into the dressing room, they have a replay system that they can access there, television. I mean, they have the game taped. The minute he went into the room, he taped it back again. He saw that he made the wrong call. He could see it, that he made the wrong call. There's always a pool reporter from the local media that will come down to ask any questions. He went out, talked to the reporter and said, I screwed up. I cost that kid a perfect game. And he lost a lot of sleep over that for a week to come. He also got death threats from just deranged fans. It's just the kind of thing you get. He was in a rough situation already. His mother he had some family tragedies, and he'd stayed with his family. He lived nearby, and he'd stayed with his family before the game, and there was some serious problems that were going on. So it's conceivable that his focus was 99% there and not 100% there. But the nicest thing that happened came out of it, though. First of all, he was forthright and didn't try to say it was kind of cut and dry, I think. But the umpire and the pitcher wrote a book together. They got an agreement. The two of them collaborated on writing a book called Nobody's Perfect. And they both talked about their experiences, how they got to where they were, how they intersected, and what their lives had been like afterwards. And it was a very rewarding experience for both of them. Getting back to the point, Jim Joyce would have loved to have had instant replay because that would have gotten the call right. And they all agree that getting the call right is the most important thing. And they all know what Jim Joyce went through this one time that he didn't get the call right. So I don't think you'll find an umpire that is against instant replay. They may find it irritating in one way or another, but the goal is to get it right. And the unfortunate part of not getting it right can be so unfortunate that I think they appreciate it. Now, you see them go and they put this headsets on. What happens is the calling umpire and the crew chief go over and they talk to, there are umpires, they work, I think 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks out of the year in New York. There's a replay center in the Chelsea area of Lower Manhattan. I went and visited Replay Center one time to see what it was like. And it's a really high-tech place full. I mean, you can get like 12 different views of the same game. 8 to 12 cameras we see one on television, but they're switched from camera to camera. But they've got them all up there. And the minute they know there's something wrong, they start going through the replays. Even before the umpires have picked up the headsets, they may have already started to look at the replay. Those umpires the umpires on the field really don't say anything. They just wait for the umpires in New York to tell them safe or out or fair or foul or whatever the call is. You may see them talking on television, but they're talking to each other usually, and they're not on the headset. Their mics go mute. They just hear what the umpires in New York tell them. The umpires may unmute them and say, "Tell me what happened," but then they mute them. And they have 1 or 2 umpires working the game in New York will come out with a call. It'll either be the call stands, the call's overturned, or it's just for overturned, or it's just let stand because they might say it's correct, or there's an in-between one where they kind of let the call stand, but they don't necessarily say it was correct.
So, Bill, we have a couple of comments and questions in the chat now. Gail mentioned, so you had asked folks if they were umpires. Gail said that she refs soccer, so that was the closest Gail's ever been. But Tom Dunn, who's using his wife's Jill's account, so it shows up as Jill's name. Tom has been an umpire for men's league and lower levels for 23 years now.
Wow.
Tom's a longtime umpire. And then Vin had a question. Vin wanted to know, did any of the umpires admit that their mind wanders sometimes and they could miss a play?
That's a good question. I asked that question. Yeah, they don't. I think it would be rare for a major league umpire's mind to wander too much because they're just so attuned to what they have to do. The way I asked a question that touched on that, I was saying, do you ever, especially for a home plate umpire, do you ever anticipate a pitch? Like, maybe it's a knuckleballer pitching, or maybe it's a guy that has a fastball but also has a really good curveball. Do you ever anticipate the pitch? And they maybe do once in a while, but the answer is no, we can't afford to do that. Because if you anticipate the pitch, you might be off. I mean, then that pitch doesn't come in and you're not really seeing it with a clear view of what happened. You also might get hit by the pitch if you're anticipating something that comes in the wrong way. But basically, they try to keep their minds as clear as possible and go pitch by pitch. And I found that almost every single umpire has, this is a common experience that not all the time, by no means all the time, but it's a common experience that they tell me that if you were to talk to an umpire about an hour after the game and ask them what the score was, they couldn't tell you. and maybe some of the fans couldn't either, I don't know, but they would know who won the game. They would know which team won the game because they might know if the game finished at 8.5 innings because the home team didn't have to play the bottom of the ninth, or they had to play till 12 innings and then whoever won, won. But so they probably usually know who won, but they don't necessarily know that it was 6-4 or 3-1. There are no-hitters that happen. There are some of them that had no idea there was a no-hitter going on. The home plate umpire has to know if the count's 3-1 or 3-2, obviously, but they're focused pitch by pitch and not necessarily looking up at the scoreboard to see who's on deck next or any number of things that could happen to cause your mind to wander. They're human beings too, so I have to imagine that once in a while somebody's mind wanders for some reason. Something flashes and they think, oh geez, I got to remember to call so and so after the game or something, whatever. But the kind of focus that it takes to be not only in the right position and to make the right call, but if you watch an umpire game, there's a choreography that goes on when you've got a runner on base, depending on where it is. And Jill's husband would know this, working 23 years. You've got to, if there's a runner on first base and the ball gets hit to left field, you've got to move in a different way than if the ball's hit to right field. You've got to be planned to cover the bases. In the major leagues, they have 4 umpires that work a game, but you start dropping down, you'll have 3-man crews or 2-man crews, and they've got even more work to do because they have to cover a lot of the field. But every umpire, there's a place wherever a ball is hit, you could call it a rotation or something. There's a prescription as to where they need to be so that they're hopefully in the right place to make the right call.
So Bill, in the chat, Steve notes that
I see, yeah.
Going back to the whole Jim Joyce thing, that Galarraga forgave him immediately, and then they wrote a book.
Yeah, and that's what made the book so successful, I think, is that that he was that generous that he, immediately, I think, one of my favorite player was Ted Williams. He played from 1939 to 1960. I got to see him the tail end of his career, and I've written about 6 books about him at this point. And one of the things I learned in the process of the game, he was a kind of a fiery personality. He spit at the press box a few times. He made rude gestures to fans that got on his case. He was kind of mercurial, but in all of his time playing a game, he never was ejected from a single game by any umpire, never once. And it wasn't because he was the great Ted Williams, because when he was 21 years old and a rookie, he was no great Ted Williams. He was a great player. He drove in 145 runs his rookie year. Nobody has ever done that since. He still holds the record for RBIs by a rookie major leaguer. But he certainly wasn't getting any favors at the plate. Later on in life, there's stories like Yogi Berra catching for the Yankees, and he'd say, that was a strike, and the umpire would say, if Mr. Williams did not swing it, it was not a strike. He built up a reputation for taking walks. Ted Williams still holds today the highest lifetime on-base percentage of anybody that ever played, 482, 48% of the time. He came up to bat, he got on base, either with a base hit or a walk. He holds the highest walks percentage of anybody. He knew the strike zone and he refused to swing at bad pitches. And the umpires eventually came around to that. But he set a walks record in his rookie year, too. He was there from the beginning when he wasn't getting any favors. Now, that's the Ted Williams tangent, but it's...
And so, Bill, I have a follow-up question for you. You actually mentioned the word ejection there, and it got me thinking, did the umpires you interview have any comments, or what were their thoughts on, I guess one of my favorite things it's like my least favorite thing and my favorite thing, kind of like in hockey, like with fights. I hate it, but then you can't look away. Is when like the managers come out to argue or the players come out to argue, and they throw dirt on the home plate and they throw the Gatorade cooler and everything. How do umpires react to that? It seems like there's some inconsistencies where sometimes the umpire will let the person get away with a lot, and other times they kind of have a quick trigger.
There's certain words that will trigger,
yeah.
which I won't repeat here.
Thank you.
But some of them would be maybe uncomplimentary about just getting personal with the umpire, regardless of what actual words you said. That's something you're not supposed to do. You don't see that kind of argument that much anymore with replay. I mean, first of all, there's a limited number of challenges that each team gets, so they're careful with their use of replay. But if it's a close call, they'll call for a replay. If it's a close call, even the umpire will call for a replay. It doesn't have to be one of the managers that calls for it. If an umpire is uncertain, they'll have a crew chief review, and because they want to make sure they get it right. So you don't see that kind of argument anymore. I was talking to Jerry Davis is a longtime umpire. I don't know how many years he's been doing it. Maybe 30 years now. He certainly back in the 1990s. His wife said that was the thing she misses most about these games. She said it used to be really, really exciting. She'd go to a game, watch the game, and that would be the thing now. If they all go to replay, people will run off to the restroom to get a quick restroom visit in or something of that sort, as opposed to watching the drama that you were talking about. Some of that was an act. The umpires would come out and put on a bit of an act to make it look like they were standing up for their players or whatever. There's stories about them going out and kicking the dirt and saying, "I know you were right, but I got to make this look good for Tim," or something of that sort. And they say, "Give me another 30 seconds and then throw me out of the game," and then they would. We have a database that where you can look up a place called Retro Sheet, and you can look up and see which umpires have ejected whom on what days. And so every time before I went to interview, I knew when the umpires were coming to town, I knew which crew was coming, and so I'd do some quick homework and say, okay, I'm going to see Jerry Davis, or I'm going to see Rob Drake, or whoever it might be. And I'd do my homework beforehand. And so I'd always look up to see how many people they had ejected. With two brothers, Tim Welke and Bill Welke. Bill is retired now. His younger brother is still umpiring. When I interviewed one of them, they each had 64 ejections. I said, you're tied to your brother. You got to go, you got to have to beat him. And he had no idea that they had each had 64 ejections. There's at least 3 of them. The guy that's the head, the oversees all the umpires, he just retired this year, was Joe Torre. Used to be, ball player and then manager of the New York Yankees, but he became in effect, the vice president of Major League Baseball that oversees the umpires. And 3 of the umpires that I interviewed, that was the first guy they had ejected. I said, you threw out your boss. No, the guy that became your boss, And they've told the story about Joe Torre. They said, we used to get into arguments with him. He developed a whole new respect for umpires himself when he got involved in the work of supervising them and began to realize some of the calls they had to make, some of the things they have to go through to get to the next job on time and so forth.
So just to address a comment that Steve made in the chat, Steve, just so you know, I am recording this and I will send you the link to the video tomorrow morning. So you'll be able to catch up on the first 30 minutes that you missed.
Right.
We're going to wrap.
Steve, I did talk about the road to the majors, and that's what I spent, 5 or 10 minutes talking about that. So you'll be able to catch that later.
Yeah, I promise to get that to you tomorrow by tomorrow morning, if not tonight. We got about 5 more minutes. So if anyone has any more, so it looks like Ronald has a question. So Ronald, I'm going to unmute you, and then you can ask your question. So just give me 2 seconds. Okay, go ahead, Ronald.
Yeah, I was wondering if you talked to the umpires at all about the stuff that's going on with, shall we say, close pitches and the warnings that are given out. It seems that some umpires have a quicker trigger to eject or at least warn both benches if a pitcher comes in too close to a batter. Did you talk to the umpires about that? You know, the brushback pitches and everything like that?
Yeah, usually there's a bit of, they're pretty aware of things that are going on. So there was a time a couple of years ago, or maybe now it's 6 years ago, when Tampa Bay and Boston
Hmm.
had a thing going on between the two teams. And umpires tend to be aware of that there was maybe some bad blood between a couple of teams, or maybe one pitcher has got a little too aggressive sometimes. They're kind of attuned to some of that coming into the game, so they might be aware of that. There are times that when they exchange the lineup cards before the game, they might actually say, now let's have a good series or something of that sort. Maybe they don't say anything more provocative than that, but just kind of let both managers know that they're being watched. I suspect, I mean, as indicated, these guys are all individuals. They've each come in. They might have had a fight with their spouse earlier in the day. I mean, I don't know, you know, things happen during the course of a game that might make them, put them on edge or something. But I think, you pick up the whole battle between the pitcher and the batter. And if there's some pitcher that's getting maybe a little too aggressive, the umpire might say something to the catcher or to the pitcher. And I might have a quicker trigger one day, just for one reason or another. I don't think there's too many umpires that are considered to be provocateurs in that fashion. There's one umpire called Tom Hallion. If you get a chance to see him work the plate, watch his strike three call. He's crafted that. He said it's my signature. I worked on it. He does a whole elaborate thing of how he does that, and he says he thinks that both teams like it, but I'm not sure if I were the batter, I'd want to see him make that dramatic a call if I, took a call third strike or something.
Any other questions, Ronald?
No, that's fine.
Great, thanks so much. Bob, I see your hand up. Before I get to Bob, I just want to share that my favorite umpire is a fictional character, but I love Leslie Nielsen in the Naked Gun movie. I think that umpire scene is one of the funniest film scenes in history. So wanted to throw that out there. All right, Bob. Bob,
you guys probably saw the book on the website, but here's what it looks like. And there's a picture of it when you log on to the chat or something. That's what it looks like. It's out there. It came out May 29th, so you can read it before other people.
I just shared the Amazon link,
Okay.
Bill, and I'll
Yes,
I'll include information in the email I send out tomorrow morning. All right, so Bob, I think you're unmuted. Did you have a question for Bill?
Yes. Hi, Bill.
Hi.
Umpire calls a challenge and they are wrong about the call. How are they graded and thought of?
Well, it happens to everybody at one time or another. You were here from the beginning. As I said, they
Yes.
do get graded, and almost all of them get grades they're all A's. They might be an A- occasionally, and if that one umpire that made the 3 overturned calls in one game, he probably got a C for that game. But
Right.
over the course of a season, well, I wouldn't say C. It'd be worse than a C. If C is average. But and he's a good umpire too. That guy that had that bad night. But yeah, I mean, they do get graded, and they look at the grades, and they will talk to a supervisor. If the supervisor will say, you were a little off tonight, were you, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
they'll have a conversation if it seems merited, and there's a dialogue that goes on. I'm kind of impressed and became impressed with how much Major League Baseball invests in taking care of these guys, as I said, from the health standpoint, but just in the dialogue that goes back and forth. Right now, we might wonder if Major League Baseball cares if there's baseball, but once it gets started, they do care for the umpires anyhow.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I wouldn't want to be an umpire.
Thank you.
All right, thanks for your question, Bob. So, Bill, we'll get you out of here on these 2 questions. I'm not sure if your book addresses it, because I know you had 4 years worth of interviews, and this is sort of more recent. but can you talk about the big Houston Astros cheating scandal, and how do umpires deal with cheating? How did no umpires not hear the drum beats, the trash cans? Got to imagine that's kind of hard to miss. If the batter can hear it, how can the umpire not hear it? And then the other thing would be, and you just touched on it, but do you think there'll be baseball this season? So we'll get you out of here with those two questions.
Yeah, that whole so-called cheating thing, I haven't talked to any umpire, I think, since that all really came out. So I don't really, I'd be interested to know that very thing. Didn't you hear this banging? What did you think it was all about? The other team had to hear it too. I mean, my baseball, there's always been cheating of one kind, certainly sign stealing. Cheating maybe is not a good word, but there's always been sign stealing in baseball. It's expected. That's why they have signals. They don't just yell, "Hey, throw me a fastball." They put down, one finger, or they switch up the signs. If there's a runner on second base that has a view to the signs the catcher is calling, they switch the signs in some way to try to throw people off. So it's the other team's fault for getting outmaneuvered if they succumb to sign stealing. The reason that the Astros and to some degree the Red Sox have got punished is not necessarily so much that they were stealing signs, but they did it in a way that they were told not to do beforehand, which is to use electronic devices in a certain way. Everybody expects the runner on second base to be trying to pick things out. The reason when you have a mound conference, they'll talk like this to each other is because of possible lip readers in the dugout, because they've used that. They'll all try to pick up any tendency they possibly can. But yeah, it would be interesting to ask about all this banging of trash cans in the dugout and so forth. It seems so juvenile. You'd think that somebody would have gotten caught at it somehow before it actually happened. Now, your other question was, do I think there's going to be baseball? We talked about this a little bit before the chat, the two of us. I just can't imagine that there won't be, because there's so much to lose if it doesn't happen. We're going to have hockey playoffs soon. We're going to have basketball playoffs soon. The football season will probably start on time. I don't know what will happen on the other end of it if there's a second wave of COVID-19 that comes along, but they'll probably get the season off to a normal start. Baseball should be holding center stage right now. I wouldn't know that if I were a ball player, I'd want to be out there playing right now, but enough of them would, especially if there were enough protections in terms of no fans in the stands, and limited. I know when they do interviews, they're not supposed to talk to people like me close up. They'll do it from some distance. They'll have an interview facility, and there'll probably be a rope, and you stand 12 feet away from the press group or something of that sort. So they'll have protections, but they're going to be somebody sliding into second base, and they're going to fall down and fall on top of each other. So they're going to have an awful lot of testing and a lot of backup in case somebody does test positive at some point to make whatever arrangements need to be made. But I would like to see them start on the 4th of July as the national pastime and somehow pull this off. I don't know right now if they're going to be able to do it that quick, but I sure would like to see them do something here. I suspect that most of the people in this room right now like baseball. We may be a smaller group of people than we would have been 50 years ago, where it was clearly the dominant sport. But it's a very important thing to many people. And I think it has some healing. It can bring some healing to some of us in some ways. Maybe your team will get beat 18-0, but maybe they'll come back the next day and win a game.
So, Bill, we've hit 8 o'clock. I know we've started a few minutes late, but I do want to sort of end now. So, Bill, did you have any last words you wanted to share with the group?
No. I appreciate you all coming and listening. I didn't see too many people drop off. In fact, maybe one person dropped off. I appreciate your attention. I appreciate the questions. I hope when we do have baseball, or if you watch one of the Korean baseball games, I taped a couple of them at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I could never watch the whole game all the way through, but watch the umpires. Just try to get a sense of what they're doing and try to guess why they're doing it. And it's become a different kind of sport for me, because I'll watch them. I tend to watch the ball, but I'll watch them in between the action and try to sort out what they're doing.
Good advice. Good advice. I watched highlights of a game, and there were stuffed animals behind home plate, so that was a nice touch. But anyway, want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. Obviously, want to thank Bill for being very generous with his time and giving us a solid hour of baseball talk. So we appreciate that. Everyone, look for that email tomorrow morning. Would love for you to fill out that feedback survey. It should just take you about 60, 90 seconds, and I'll share any feedback with Bill. So thank you all so much for coming, and everyone have a great night. Go Red Sox.
Thank you.
Bill.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night.